Hey, this is the Remote Podcast, and I'm your host, Victor Kung. You're listening to episode 4. Hello, and welcome to the Remote Podcast, episode 4. This podcast is all about location independence, digital nomadism, and living life on your own terms. Each week, we interview a new guest on the show, and this week I sat down with Yoni Binstock, a digital nomad who has been traveling with his wife around the world for almost a year. In that time, they've traveled to over 10 countries across 3 continents. In this week's episode, which I'm so excited to share with you, we cover a range of topics, including 1. How Yoni and his wife learned how to code to prepare for their location-independent lifestyle. 2. How they bring in income through remote work, freelancing, and passive income streams. 3. Yoni's experiences making passive income through ebooks, software, and e-courses. Yoni also shares with us some crazy stories, including paying bribes in Vietnam and playing soccer with elephants. I'm so thrilled to share this interview with you, and I know you'll learn so much from it. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 4 of the Remote Podcast. For the show notes and the interview transcription, visit www.theremotelifestyle.com/4. Hey Yoni, it's so exciting to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Glad to be here.
The reason I'm so excited for this episode is because I remember the first time we spoke around a year ago, and we were talking about all our plans for traveling around the world, living in different places. Fast forward 1 year, that's your life right now.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year. Maybe even the best year of my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good start.
Yeah.
So where are you right now?
So I am an hour out of Portland in a small town called Malala, and I'm house sitting with my wife, and we're taking care of a house, 2 horses, 2 dogs, and a cat.
Okay. I almost want to just skip ahead just to like present day, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your background before you became a professional house sitter?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, I think, interesting things in my life, but what really changed for me was about 3 years ago when I moved to San Francisco. At the time, I was in the renewable energy solar field, and I was working for companies like Solar City and Solar Mosaic. And being friends and getting acquainted with the San Francisco tech scene, I realized kind of how much I was missing out by not being a developer, and how exciting it was that you could build things at any time and just do really incredible things and get paid really well. That was also a consideration. But what was probably the most important thing to me was that it was a job where I could live wherever in the world. It was not location dependent. Where solar was very location dependent. You really had to either be in the Bay Area or a few other places around the world. So along with my wife, we decided to go through the General Assembly Coding Bootcamp program. We both graduated and got jobs at tech companies in San Francisco. I worked for about 1.5 years, 2 years in San Francisco as an engineer, and we thought that was a good point to start traveling.
Okay, great. So you kind of noticed that in San Francisco there were a lot of tech-enabled jobs that were location independent, and that led you and your wife to pursue that path through taking a coding course at General Assembly, and then through gaining some job experiences, and after picking up the skills, you decided that you were ready for the next step, which is location independence.
That's right.
So what were the different steps that you needed to go through to make that transition after you had acquired the skills?
Yeah, so I think the first thing was to make sure my skills were at the right level. I think if we had left as soon as we graduated from General Assembly, it would not have worked out well. I think to guarantee that we had skills that anyone in the world would hire for was crucial. So developing skill sets to a standard was the first thing that we made sure we did. We also and you write a lot about this, is we got credit cards that gave us a lot of really great miles. And so for a lot of our long distance flights, our cross Pacific and cross Atlantic flights to Asia and Europe and whatnot, we pretty much did for free. So we saved thousands of dollars that way. I think other things that we did to prepare were we started joining digital nomad communities, forums, Slack channels, things like that. One, it immersed ourselves in this community and showed that a lot of other people are doing this. And we could ask questions about where to go, what cities had good Wi-Fi, preferences for different places to eat, and things like that.
Okay.
So those were some of the things that we did to prepare for our trip.
Okay, and I'm going to dive into each one of them one by one.
Yeah.
So just to pick your brains so that our listeners can really follow up on the resources that you suggest. So the very first one is to make sure that your skills are at a certain level. How do you know when you have enough of a skill set, especially when it comes to, in your cases, development?
Yeah. Well, what I would do is that if you're, let's say, currently employed and you're living in a city, it could be San Francisco, it could be any other city in the world, and you're looking to start traveling, I would suggest look on websites, either like Upwork and other freelancing websites, or on job boards that are specific for remote developers, and start applying. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to leave right away, but look at the reception that you're getting back. Are you getting phone calls and emails back? Are you interviewing? And that would be a good indication if you would be able to get income if you left your full-time 9-to-5 job.
Okay, got it. And moving on to the second point, you mentioned travel hacking resources. Back then, what type of websites did you look at, and which ones would you recommend?
I think, I don't know them off the top of my head, but I think there was the Points guy. I don't know specifically his URL, but if you Google that, I think that was my major website. And I think Nomadic Matt was the other person. And they had great resources about which miles to use, which credit cards to use, and which airlines to book them with. I think it's a great way to build up a credit score and to just pretty much get free miles and free travel.
Yeah. So the two of them, and I'm familiar with both of them.
Okay.
They are the Points guy and Nomadic Matt.
Yep.
Perfect. And the third one is digital nomad communities. You mentioned immersing yourself in these communities and doing research, asking questions before making the jump. Are there any specific websites you have in mind?
I would say that I think that there's a digital nomad Slack channel created by Levels.io that has been very supportive of what we're doing, and we're very active on it, my wife and I. In addition, with Levels.io, the creator of that Slack channel, I also, and I would recommend following him on Twitter. So he is a good example of a software engineer specifically who has gone remote and has done both work building products for himself and doing development work for clients. Just an example of what we would like to do.
Okay, great. So levels.io. Have you ever used Nomad List? I think they have also a Slack community as well.
Yeah, Nomad List is a great resource and one of the first websites we go to when we're planning our next long-term trip.
Okay, good to know. I want to join, but I don't want to pay yet because I'm not yet starting to travel.
Yeah.
So, okay, good to know that that's a great one. Awesome. So those are the three things you did to prepare. What was it like actually making the jump? Did you make sure that you had a job or freelancing gigs ahead of time, or did you kind of just jump into it? Because I know for you guys, it's two people. It's kind of different than a single young adult just packing your bags up and jumping ship.
Absolutely. So what I did right before I left San Francisco was to get a remote job. In fact, about a month, maybe 2 months before I left, I got a contract with a guy who lived in San Mateo, so only about an hour south. But we were working remotely. I only saw him once every 2 weeks, and it was always in the plans. And I told him at the beginning that I plan to travel. This is where I'll be. And I hope we can work together. And he was hesitant at first, especially with the long distance. I was going to be in Asia. But I think through that, the last month I was in San Francisco working remotely, working apart from him, gave him confidence that he could keep me on board. So I would recommend either trying to find a remote job before you leave, trying to convert your, let's say, your 9 to 5 job into a remote, or have, if none of those, then definitely have savings and have a plan to get a remote job or clients as quickly as possible. Although places like Southeast Asia are incredibly cheap and your burn rate is really, really small, especially compared to San Francisco,
Right.
both for keeping revenue neutral or revenue plus, you're gonna want to get work as quickly as possible. And so with 2 people, with my wife and I, it's been really great. So we work on a range of different clients and contracts. Sometimes they're 4 months long, sometimes they're 2 days long. And so because we're kind of constantly in flux, sometimes if my wife has a ton of work and she just can't complete it all, I'll help her out, and vice versa. And sometimes, either her or I will have a slump of, 1 or 2 weeks where it's kind of hard to get work. And that's fine because the other one is making money and possibly helping the other. So with 2 people, one, you don't become lonely, traveling the world. I get to spend all this great experiences with my wife. And it balances, it makes some stability in our cash flow.
Okay. No, that's great. So have you found it challenging picking up new projects while you're overseas? Because I know you recommended getting a remote job or converting your current job into a remote position. But that to me seems like you're just taking your 9 to 5 and taking it on the road with you. But you also mentioned taking up side projects and contract positions. Can you go a little bit more into detail about that?
Yeah, I would say there are 2 distinct types of remote work. You're either going to get a remote job with a company that's full-time, that's for all intents and purposes 9 to 5, possibly with benefits, and that company can be located in New York or San Francisco and Paris and London, and they probably have a staff of 10 people or above that work around the world. And I think that if you plan to stay somewhere for a long time, if you don't plan to go out every day, that can be a great way. You keep the stability of a 9 to 5, but the freedom to live wherever you want. So that's one option. And I think the other option are short-term clients and contracts. And you find a lot of those on Upwork, as I mentioned before, and there's a few other freelancing websites. And the hard part about those is that you're competing against the lowest common denominator or the cheapest vendor. So people in India or China or Pakistan, things like that. And there's just hundreds of thousands of people competing against you. So it's kind of hard to stand out. But because there is so much work that's needed, and as soon as you get some experience and reviews on your profile, it's much easier to get work. It takes a lot of tweaking of your, it's called bidding, when you bid for a project, when you submit a proposal. So you really got to work really diligently on that. That's what's going to separate you from your competitors. You like to think it's going to be your work and your profile and your character, but the first thing that a client sees is the proposal. So putting a lot of time into that will help you get more jobs.
Gotcha. So besides your development work for the remote job and through freelancing gigs, have you worked on any other passive streams of income along the way?
Yeah. So you and I have both talked about the term passive, right? Right. There's a lot of active work in them. But yeah, I have several projects I'm working on as well. I think I first started kind of side projects a few years ago. I think the first one of importance was a book I wrote on 3D printing. It was called How to Become a 3D Printing Entrepreneur. And at the moment, or at that time, it really wasn't to make too much money. I kind of knew back then that books were going to be, pretty easy to self-publish, pretty hard to make any substantial amount of money, just at the low price point. It was really to make myself a leader in the field. And after that, I got to speak at conferences and teach courses, and it was a really great experience doing that. I continued with a few other books. There was a book about the Rio 2016 Summer Olympics, and I just published a book on the Los Angeles urban disaster guide. So it's an experiment to see if I can, build survival guides that are specific to each city, kind of like a Lonely Planet guide, but for urban, disasters. I used to be an EMT, and I used to be part of CERT, which is Community Emergency Response Team in Los Angeles. So disasters and how people respond to them has always been something I've been interested in.
Right.
And besides those books, I have a software product called Goodnight Chrome that helps parents get their kids off the computer at night. So parents get at 8 p.m. and then Chrome shuts down. And I also have a video course on Udemy called How to Get a Job in the Solar Field. So those are my projects, and they, I would say, bring about 30% of my monthly revenue.
Oh, wow. That's great. So, there's a lot of products that I want to get into all of them, but we might have to pick and choose our battles. I remember we talked about your book on your guide to the Rio 2016 Olympics, and this was actually a year before.
Yeah.
And I remember you said you wrote that guide in anticipation that it was going to be popular because of this big event coming up. And you also had a lot of affiliate links to your Airbnb and your Uber account in there, which I think it's ingenious. Can you go in a little bit about how that went? Because I'm very curious to hear about it.
Yeah. So the Uber and the Airbnb referral links worked pretty well, which is great because I do Airbnb and Uber and Lyft all the time. I don't own a home and I don't own a car. So getting those referral links are very helpful. And as you mentioned, I wrote this about a year ahead of time, or maybe it was closer to 8 months. And the theory was, can I build products for my future self? Can I do something that I know is going to be huge in demand or have a huge amount of traffic? And I learned that the Olympics are the 4th most popular search term every 4 years, that millions of people watch the Olympics and are interested. So I did it. And what happened as a result, though, and I recently wrote kind of like a conclusion report about what went well, what didn't, was 2 things. So one is I couldn't do, I would say, like real PR or real marketing because the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, are really, really stringent about the use of Olympics in anything. And so although I had published and the Olympics were my title, I was very careful not to do any marketing with kind of big brands or on big channels. So never reached out to CNN or BBC. Never tried to really get in front of it with big marketing pushes. My biggest thing was if people are going to search in Guide to the Rio 2016 Olympics, that my book appeared first in Google. And that's what happens. So that was my main marketing strategy. But I think if I could have done a bigger marketing push and not been fearful of copyright, I think it would have been even better. And the other thing I learned is, books sell I think I was selling at $2.99 or maybe $4.99. And so you just need, depending on what your goal is and how much revenue you're aiming to make, you just need a huge amount of traffic. So I got a considerable amount of traffic and a considerable amount of sales, but I think I did better with those referral links than I did in actual sales. I think that the value I gained is higher in the referral codes than the actual revenue in the books, but it's money nonetheless. So we'll see if I do something similar for the Tokyo Olympics. Or if the whole copyright issue is just going to be too big of a barrier. But I think the theory still holds, though, is building products for the future when I know that a wave will be there.
That's so cool. And feel free to share with us if you want how many units of the book you sold. I'm just very curious to see what the analytics are like.
Right. I'm trying to remember. It was between 500 to 1,000, but I'd say closer to 1,000 sales of units in the week of the Olympics. So
wow.
Yeah, so it was pretty good. There was, it was ramping up, I'd say a month beforehand. And then surprisingly, I'm still getting sales afterwards. Obviously, a much more reduced amount. But it's interesting, if I still make, I think, $20 every month for the next year, that's not, it's insignificant really. But, it's interesting because what I'm starting to think about is if I had 10 products, 10, let's say these ebooks that only made $100 a month each, by itself it is nothing, but total accumulation is $1,000 every month. And times that every year, that's an extra $12,000, which is somewhat significant. That's a promotion. That's that's some good chump change. So right. I think that if I can build, let's say 10 of these products or something along those lines in the next 2 to 3 years and in a 3-month time period for each project, then that could be a profitable way forward for side projects. That instead of spending a year or more and thousands of dollars in this big, ambitious startup idea and investing all this time and money with a pretty high risk of failure, I'd much rather have a much smaller scope project, which, let's say with a 50% chance of failure, and only work on it for 3 months and only invest, let's say $20 or $50 into making it. So that's been a new theory of mine.
Okay, that's great. So that's your ebook.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next one, you also have a Chrome extension.
Yeah.
So that's moving into software.
Yeah.
How was the process of selling software versus an ebook through Amazon? I guess your Chrome extension was on the Chrome store. So how was that process?
So Connect Chrome was almost an example of what I should not do. And it was a project I worked on for about 2 years when I was in San Francisco. I invested a lot of time and a lot of money. This was before I was a developer, so I was hiring people into building the software product. I think, I was building a product for myself. I wanted to get off my computer at night. So, so I could spend more time reading or with my wife, just getting to sleep earlier. And I also was talking to parents who had that same problem, especially with their children. But what the difficulty was getting that software in the hands of parents. I think if I did a better, product market fix or did more research into my marketing, I would have figured out that, parents aren't looking for the hippest new Chrome extension in a Chrome store.
Right.
Most of them don't know what an extension is. So luckily it is a kind of monthly recurring revenue, and I've gotten some customers, so it's going to remain open. But I've learned about software that it's expensive to create both in time and money, and B2C, having customers buying software is extremely difficult. Most people want software for free, and if they're gonna pay for software like an app, they're only gonna pay 99 cents, maybe $1.99. So I'm starting to think about B2B software, but that also comes with challenges, just at the scope of the features that you usually need to build for a really robust B2B software application.
Yeah, and all the customer support, all the maintenance that comes along with that.
Right.
I do think it's funny because you said you built it for yourself, but then you kind of try to sell it, target it to parents and their children. So I think it's interesting, but it's definitely a good learning opportunity, and there's still money coming through.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly.
Perfect. So moving on to the third thing, which was your solar city. No, your how to become a solar. Oh, how to get into the solar field.
Right.
Yeah. And that's your foray into e-courses, which is another subset of product selling.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about how that went.
So I got my master's in solar from Boston University. And as I mentioned before, when I was in San Francisco, I was working for solar companies. And I absolutely love the field, and I'm a huge proponent of the solar industry. And in fact, when I was at Solar City, the company was growing so fast at the time that I was getting several of my friends to move cross country, including my younger brother, and I got them jobs at the company at Solar City. And I was starting to build material about how to get a job and whatnot in this field. And so that was kind of the material I already had, a lot of it. And the other thing was I was looking how I can sell a product that, at a higher price point than an ebook. And it looked like people were willing to purchase, things at $40, maybe even more, for an informational product in video form, especially revolving around how to get a job or a career. And it took a bit longer than I anticipated. It took about, I'll say, 4 months, especially with the recording and the audio and the video production. There's a lot of things I had never done before. And I published it, and it's done pretty well. But a few things that have made it a bit more complicated was that I published it on Udemy, which seemed to be the primary place where people post courses, just because they have a huge amount of traffic. But they control a lot about your product that you can't do anything about. So the first month I published, you could price your course at whatever, $200 if you wanted to. Sure. Then the month after, they put a cap on it. And I think they put a cap at $20, right? You could only sell your courses for $20. And I was making a pretty good amount of revenue that first month, and then it pretty much halved the next month, and for the following, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 months. Luckily, recently, I think last month, they kind of reversed their decision, and they went back, and I think they have a cap, but I think it's maybe $100. Could be wrong though. And so I was able to move my price point back to what it originally was, and I've seen my revenue double every month. So when that type of power is outside of your hands, it can be really frustrating.
Yeah, that's whack. I've never heard of anything like that where they can control your pricing.
Yeah. Luckily, they don't have any rules about providing your course anywhere else. But just because they have a lot of traffic and a platform where it's pretty easy to upload your videos and your content, I think I'll probably remain with them. I think other things that I've incorporated with that course is one-on-one coaching. So at the beginning and the end of the course, I provide my information on clarity, which people can book one-on-one time with me. And so that's a great way for people to get really one-on-one attention and tutoring and help. And it also helps me because I can charge a pretty high amount for every half an hour that I talk to the person. And the other thing I did is I turned the course into an ebook. So I already had all my script, so I had to tweak it a bit, but it took only a week to convert it into a book. So having kind of a range of different products around this solar and how to get a job in solar, I think has been beneficial.
That's pretty amazing, because there's 2 things I got away from I took from that. The first one is repurposing your content from video to a book form, and the second one was basically a content upgrade. At the end of your course, people can book a time with you. That's like an add-on.
Right.
And I think it's actually really interesting the way you're doing this, because it's almost as if you're not giving anything away for free. Everything you're doing, you're charging for it.
Yeah.
Right now, blogging is the big thing, and blogging is all about content marketing, giving away free value.
Yeah.
You might repurpose. I might even repurpose this podcast into like a written form that people can use to download and to give me their email. But when it comes to charging people for money, it seems like there's a big jump when it comes to blogging. Like, people are almost afraid to ask for money, where if you've taken the opposite approach, you created products that you're selling, and after you sell them in one form, you repackage them and sell them in another form. So I think I think that's amazing, and that's my biggest takeaway from this, because it seems to be working wonders for you.
I think people don't value things that are free. I think that's what it comes down to. Is that as soon as you put a price on it, people, I think by and large, give more value to it. So you could write, a long blog about, how to get a job in the solar field, let's just say. And it might do moderately well and get good traffic, and you could link it back to your other material. But I'd imagine that you could convert that into PDF and sell it, let's say, for $2. I think that would be a much better bet than just offering it this material that you probably spent a few days on just for free, in the hopes that maybe 5% of them go to your product and purchase that. I rarely, if any time, build products or write content that's free.
Damn, that's a story of my life right now. So I'm so sad right now.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it seems like it's a lot of the conventional strategic approach to online business when it comes to blogging is to give away things for free to build up your mailing list. And I think something you talked about earlier was quite interesting. You mentioned that Udemy had the power to alter the pricing for all the courses that are part of their course library. And so one of the proponents for creating your own newsletter, building your own personal brand, is so that you have a direct channel to sell to your audience. And I think there are research studies done where they said if at any given point of time you sell directly to your newsletter, there is a 2.5% chance that people will make a purchase. So it almost seems like there's two strategies to do the same thing. So I'm curious about, do you have any plans on going from this approach where you're selling products on Amazon, on Udemy, on different platforms, and eventually creating your own platform where you can sell those directly? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just very curious.
I don't think I will have this one platform where all my products are featured. I mean, I do have my own portfolio website and my website about me where you can find all these things. But because, one, my projects are so different, I think a person that bought my book about 3D printing is probably not going to be the same person getting the course on solar. So that's why I'm never going to have one website. I'm never going to have one email list for all my customers, right? They're just not related. Now that can be harmful. Like, would have it been better for me to done everything with 3D printing? As soon as I wrote the book on 3D printing, to do a video course on 3D printing, to do some software around 3D printing, I don't know. You know what? Maybe. But what I have a tendency to do, I think for good and for bad, is to chase the future. So, when 3D printing, just came out and it was the front page of The Economist, I was just smitten. I love this technology. I thought it was the coolest thing, straight from Star Trek. And so I taught myself how to do 3D modeling. I, built this online store where people could purchase my models. And then I went to the book and taught courses and spoke at events, and it was cool. But for a time, and not that I got bored with it, but just something else, really captured my imagination and really captured my drive. And so I went there, I went with my passion. And right now it's virtual reality, right? This thing where it seems to be the future, where a lot of people are putting their time and their money in, but no one knows how to do it yet. No one knows what they're doing. And so it's this Wild West, which I love, right? You can be, a leader, you can be a builder and producer in this field if you, learn the languages, if you are aware of what other people are building, and if you share your work. That's probably the most important thing, right? If you share your work. So, but it also has a tendency to kind of leave projects behind, or leave the possibility of a large product array around a single idea, leaving that on the table. So for good and for bad.
No, I think that's a brilliant answer, and I think you're totally right. Because right now I'm starting to work on a YouTube channel, And sometimes I want to do just funny prank videos, but it's like that doesn't fit under my brand at all.
Right.
So I'm trying to find ways to tie that back to the core theme. And I'm so glad you talked about that, because a lot of blogs right now are telling people to create things under one brand, where I don't think that's always feasible for each person, because for some people you might have a variety of different interests, and trying to cater to just one group is not being reflective of who you are. So I think this is solid gold information that isn't readily available out there. So I'm glad you shared that with us.
Yeah. Me personally, I'm very involved with like liberal politics about activism on climate change, and 3D printing and virtual reality and solar industry, in kind of transhumanism, like 3 or 4 other things. So it would have been very difficult for me to have one singular or insular brand.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it should be, and it's working out great for you.
Yeah.
I could actually talk about this subject for a really long time, but I want to move forward and talk about how your life has been since you've started traveling. Where are some of the places you've been to? What's life like on the road? And whatever you want to share.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, this has been the best year of my life. I don't think I've been happier. So I think a big part of that is that I get to share these experiences with someone I love. I think a lot of people in the digital nomad community are, single or maybe have a casual relationship. And so when they travel, either by themselves, that they can have this wonderful experience and maybe share it with people that they meet on the road. But I think to share it with someone you're going to be with for the rest of your life, it makes those memories so much better. And so when we left San Francisco, I think we first went back to my home in Ohio. We had Thanksgiving, kind of like a going away celebration with my parents and my family. So then we went to Southeast Asia for 5 months, and we went to places like Thailand, and we went all over Thailand. We went to Bangkok and Chiang Mai and Phuket and a few other places. And then we went to Cambodia, we went to Vietnam, we went to Kuala Lumpur, then Singapore, and then Bali, and then we went to Japan. And I absolutely love Japan, by the way. And quick, a detour, but one thing I've learned in my travels is that cheap does not necessarily mean good. I think a great illustration of this is that Vietnam is probably one of the cheaper places to stay, and we got a lot of recommendations to go there. You could get meals for $4, $5 or whatnot, and we get there and a really interesting culture, really interesting history, especially coming from an American perspective. But it was kind of hard to walk on the roads. It was very polluted. I think it was our least favorite country, just because it was very much in development and it was very urban. While in Japan, obviously the most expensive country that we visited was my favorite.
Yeah.
Even though you may want to slow your burn rate and keep that really low and go to the kind of the cheapest hostels and the cheapest countries, that may not be worth it. You may not get the best experiences you can. But regardless, so after Japan, we went to France, then Spain. We went to Paris and Seville and then Granada and Barcelona. I think we went briefly back to see my parents in Cleveland, then Maya's family in Los Angeles. And then we went to we went to New Orleans for 2 weeks, then Austin for 2 weeks. We recently were in Seattle for a month. And as I mentioned, I'm currently in Portland, Oregon. We're here for 1 month.
Wow. First off, I think it's crazy that you're able to reel off all the places that you've gone to without really having to think about it too much.
Yeah.
That's a testament to your memory skills. But to dive deeper into those experiences, I'm struggling to see where to start. But I think the first place to start, how do you find places to live? I think that's a great starting point, because booking flights, we kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
You can use travel hacking to book your international flights using credit card rewards.
Yeah.
And once you're actually in the continent you're at, buying flights it's not that big of a deal. But in terms of lodging and accommodation, how did you go about that? And did that kind of determine which countries you ended up visiting?
Yeah, so a great tool is Nomad List. It has got everything that you need to know about kind of what country you should choose. So first, it has a ranking, and I think Chiang Mai and places in Thailand kind of rank at the top of that, just in terms of cost of living. And I think that was one of our earlier standards and conditions, not so much now. So I think cost of living is definitely part of that equation. I think internet speed was paramount. If a country or city or a hotel or Airbnb, didn't have great Wi-Fi, then honestly we could not go. Having consistent and great Wi-Fi was critical for us as developers, often working on Google Hangouts or Skype, or just needing the internet to do development work. So cost of living, internet reception, and I think the only other thing was just where we wanted to go. For me, I think Southeast Asia and Asian culture was really interesting to me, and I've always wanted to go to Japan as a young child. So I think it was just those three things that determined where we went.
Okay. And in terms of finding places to live, did you use Airbnb, or did you kind of show up, stay in hostels, and then try to find your way there?
No, I'm a Uber planner. I had every lodging booked for 5 months when we were in Southeast Asia. So, and it was, I say, vast majority of the time is through Airbnb, especially married and a little bit older. Hostels aren't really our thing anymore. I used to do that when I was backpacking in Europe. But if we can afford it, have some privacy, then I think Airbnb was definitely the right decision to go. But there are a few other options. One, check house sitting websites. There are a few of them, and that's how we got our current gig here in Portland, where we're house sitting and taking care of 2 horses, 2 dogs, and a cat. So some people are leaving their homes and possibly their pets, and they need someone to take care of them. Usually, there's no money involved. You just get to stay there for free. And I think another thing is just letting your friends know, where you're traveling. Either they may be in cities where you're going, or they may have friends there. So you may be able to crash on somebody's couch for 2 or 3 nights. So I think those are different lodging options that we've used.
That's awesome. I don't have any follow-up questions on that, but it's great that you can even go as far as to house sit now.
Yeah.
To stay somewhere. So really the big takeaway I'm getting from this is that all the barriers that one would associate with living life on the road are potentially overplayed, and these are things that aren't that scary. If people really want to travel, there are ways of doing it in an affordable, cost-effective manner.
Absolutely. I think both Uber, I'll include Lyft with that, and Airbnb have made it incredibly easy to travel. That you always, and Uber is pretty much everywhere in the world. They're in Singapore and they're in Japan, they're everywhere. So you can always get around no matter what. Even if you don't understand, and you can't talk with the GPS and how Uber works, you really can get from point A to point B relatively easily. And then with Airbnb, it's much, much cheaper than a hotel. I'd say it's slightly more expensive than a hostel, and you get to live either in your own place or with a local who can tell you about the city and about the area and be a really great part of your experience there.
Along that line, what were some of the challenges that you faced through traveling? What were some of the big challenges that stood out to you?
Well, one time, as you may or may not know, you have to have a visa to get into Vietnam. And recently, just yesterday though, a whole bunch of Americans got stuck in the airport because they changed the rules, but while the Americans were in flight, and so they were stuck in the airport for hours. But what happened to us is that our flight just got to the airport about 2 hours earlier, and our visa started the day we should have got in, and instead we got in kind of the night before. And so we were about to go through immigration. They look at our papers and they say, you're not supposed to be here. This is a day early. And we're like, well, the airplane got us here earlier. Long story short, we had to pay a bribe to get through immigration. It was a bit jarring. You expect to pay a bribe from someone like a police officer on the side of a road or something like that. But it was, government employees in the airport with cameras and all that stuff. But we had to get through, and you had to do what you had to do. I definitely did not want to end up in a Vietnam jail. So, paying a few dollars, maybe a bit more to get through, it had to be done, but definitely an interesting challenge that we faced.
But how did that, were they very explicit on it? It's like, if you pay us, we'll let you pass? Or is it like, because whenever you see people making bribes on TV shows or something, it's very subtle. It's very natural.
They definitely didn't ask for money, but they said, how much American dollars are you traveling with? But they wanted American dollars, not Vietnam currency. But we are already transferred all our American dollars into Vietnam currency, which I forget what it was called. And so that made it more difficult. And there was the language barrier. Their English wasn't great, and my Vietnam is not superb. Vietnamese is not superb. So it became apparent what they wanted. And I said, if I gave you this much money, would everything be okay? And they said yes, and that's what happened.
No, I'm glad you picked up on that, because I'm very bad at picking up like signs. I'm very oblivious, so I don't know how I would have done in your shoes.
We were talking to immigration for about 30 minutes. They were starting to separate my wife and I, so I did not see this moving forward in a positive way. So I was trying to look for a solution. And they provided one, and I obliged.
Okay, so that's the bad.
Yeah,
what about the good? What were some of your favorite places or most memorable experiences?
Yeah, so there's an island off of Thailand called Koh Samui. You can get there from pretty close to Phuket. And it's a really tiny island. And there was one point where I'm working on a cafe. Cafe is right on the beach. And I got my coffee, my laptop, and I'm coding away. And I'm overlooking this beautiful view, this immaculate beach, and this beautiful blue water. And it was at that point, I'm like, I made it. I really had kind of achieved a dream I'd been nurturing for years, right? To be able to work from wherever in the world. And it was a very out-of-body experience. I could kind of see myself outside my body, where I was, and doing what I was doing. And it was a very memorable moment, and be the best way to describe it. It's probably one of my kind of strongest memories of that experience was the realization that I had achieved, my goal of working remotely. And it was just at this pristine location.
That's so cool. It literally makes me think of one of those social media banner photos you see on these like digital nomad websites.
Right. And it could be, because I took a picture of my laptop and the beach. So it could be a picture I took, and it was definitely very cliche and, so Instagrammable. But regardless, it was definitely a deep moment for me.
Oh, but that's amazing, and congratulations. You worked for that. From the first time we talked about it to now, like, you've already cycled through numerous countries, continents, and now you're back in stateside.
Yeah.
Having had all of those experiences.
Yeah.
So super cool. Congratulations. It's a testament to you and your wife for taking the jump.
Yeah. And I think one other experience that was, I think, remarkable and would happen nowhere else besides, I think, Thailand, is I played soccer with an elephant. Yeah, we went to this elephant refuge center, and they were having the elephants perform a little bit, do some tricks. And there was about 100 people in this stadium type of area. Uh-huh. And they asked for a volunteer. And my wife, the intelligent woman she is, kind of raised my hand. And the guy just saw me right away, picked on me, and I had no idea what I was about to do. And they had me stand in front of a soccer goal, and they had the elephant, even though it was a baby elephant, I mean, this elephant's twice my height, run towards the soccer ball, kick the soccer ball towards me. And at that moment, I just want to run away. Seeing this elephant barrel towards me, my Neanderthalic brain was like, run, like, just run away. And I was afraid, the elephant was going to hit me or like kick the soccer ball right into my head. And I couldn't move. And the elephant just scored a goal. The audience went wild. I felt like a complete idiot. And and the elephant didn't really stop until arm's reach. I could put my arm and touch the elephant by the time it stopped. It was quite frightening. And then they had us reverse roles so that I was shooting the soccer ball and the elephant was sitting in front of the soccer. And at first the elephant took about 3/4 of this goal, right? I'm like, this is going to be an impossible shot.
Yeah.
And also, I'm wearing flip-flops and people are recording on their phones. And I really did not want to hit this, poor baby elephant in the head with a soccer ball. Like, you could just imagine that, like, going viral in a terrible, terrible way. So I'm thinking of the worst, possible situation. And somehow I kick the soccer ball and it goes right above the elephant's head into the goal. And I was like, goal! Audience went wild. But man, that was a crazy experience.
That's amazing. Like that's a full 360.
Yeah.
And by the way, I heard that elephants are supposed to be one of the most peaceful, docile mammals. So
apparently, but if one is barreling towards you, you still want to run.
Yeah, but that's so amazing. It's just so exciting to hear you have all these great experiences. So in terms of the future, what's up next in the next few months, or to the next year? Have you planned that far ahead?
Yeah, so we're starting to plan our next trip. I think we plan to go to Morocco, then Greece, Croatia, Austria, Switzerland, Milan, Monaco, then Paris. So for about 5 or 6 months. Or probably go there around February. I think that's our plan. So we're starting to plan that, but we're pretty flexible about when we would go and what other cities or take out some cities. So we're still very flexible, but that seems to be the rough plan. I think in the meantime, we want to see our families. We want to go back home for Thanksgiving. Obviously, when you travel a lot, you don't get to see your family. So when we are in the States, we try to take full advantage of that and see our family as much as possible.
Right. So right now it seems like it's a recharging period, visit family and friends before planning for the next big trip. And I guess you are a planner. You have 5 months, probably a dozen cities.
Yep.
But it sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
So we're hitting close to the hour mark.
Okay.
So to close, how can people find out more about you, see what you're up to, and maybe, download Uber or Lyft through your affiliate links?
No, it's okay. If you want to learn more about me, they can go to my website. It's YoniBinstock.com. That's YoniBinstock.com. If you want, shoot me an email. My email is ybinstock@gmail.com. Happy to answer any questions any of your listeners might have. And a lesson I think I've learned and something I've talked to other travelers is about documenting your travel and Instagram and Facebook and all these things, right? You want to document and record these amazing memories that you're going to have, and you're going to look back 20 years in the future and realize and remember how great these experiences are. But at the same time, I highly recommend don't travel to get great Instagram pictures, right? Which, can be an issue by scrolling down your Instagram feed and seeing these beautiful locations where your friends are, or on Facebook or on YouTube. You want to go to those beautiful locations and take the same pictures. I think, to take pictures and to document, to blog, is important for posterity's sake. Maybe to share with friends and family. But you should be traveling to enrich your own life, not to brag it to the world.
Yeah, because I definitely come across some accounts where it's just like nice picture after nice picture. You don't even know if they're the ones actually taking it or if they're just getting it from like a stock photo site.
That'd be terrible.
But I think that's great advice to end on. And we'll include your contact information in the show notes. So if anyone wants to contact you about everything you talked about, we covered so much today, and it was such a great learning experience for me as well. Anyways, I want to thank you once again for being part of the podcast. It's amazing as always to catch up with you.
Thanks so much, Victor. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Yoni. If you want to find out more about Yoni, along with more information on everything we talked about, visit www.theremotelifestyle.com/4. That is www.theremotelifestyle.com/4, where you can find the show notes and transcription for this week's episode. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to be notified when we release our weekly episodes. I'll see you next time. Take care.